Anakin, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka are trapped on Felucia in need of an evacuation, with Plo Koon, Commander Wolf and the 104th Battalion being dispatched to the planet to help them. As the ground forces prepare to retreat, Anakin wonders where Ahsoka is, with her having split off into her own separate jungle patrol. While the plan is to retreat, Ahsoka thinks she can still win this battle, but Obi-Wan informs her that they are leaving. As they approach to pick her up, she is still engaged in battle, leading to Anakin getting them to land in front of her to force her to stop, angrily getting her to board the LAAT. In front of the Jedi Council, Ahsoka owns up to her actions, knowing that she was wrong and that she got caught up in the moment, being tunnel-visioned and not seeing the battle as a whole. Despite Anakin taking responsibility for this, Mace Windu thinks it's best that Ahsoka take a break from the front lines, with Yoda assigning her to the library archives. Anakin introduces Ahsoka to the Jedi librarian, Jocasta Nu, before leaving. Jocasta shows Ahsoka around the archives, as well as the entrance to the Holocron Vault, though only members of the Jedi Council are allowed access. Within the Coruscant underworld, a bounty hunter known as Cad Bane is in the middle of a conversation with Darth Sidious, who is requesting Bane's services to steal a Jedi Holocron. Due to how difficult this job will be, Bane's fee and resource request is high, while Yoda feels a disturbance in the Force, telling him that something will happen. Bane configures Todo 360, a techno service droid, with a Jedi Temple security chip, before also enlisting the assistance of another bounty hunter, Cato Parasiti, showing her details on the Jedi Bola Rapol, before utilising her shape-shifting abilities to impersonate the dead Jedi, Ord Ensigns, to give Bane someone to work with on the inside. Bane has reached the perimeter of the Jedi Temple, and with the help of Cato, who is now within the Temple library, is able to get Todo to breach the Temple's outer shield defense. Anakin and Obi-Wan notice that something is wrong with the Temple's scanners, with Yoda knowing the intruders have arrived. They soon discover there has been a breach into the Temple's ventilation system. Cato is interrupted by Jocasta, who informs the impersonated Jedi about the Temple being on high alert. Cato quickly decides to knock her out before changing form again, now impersonating the librarian herself. Anakin and Obi-Wan have traced Bane's steps, locating the area he broke into, deciding to follow his route. Yoda informs Ahsoka that there is an intruder impersonating a Jedi, leading her to confront the impersonated Jocasta, with the two breaking into a fight, which ends when Ahsoka force pulls a chair out in front of her, causing Cato to trip over it and drop Jocasta's lightsaber. Bane uses the Jedi's misinformed thinking of his target being the communication center to his advantage, ordering Todo to go there, with Bane having triggered him to explode, unknown to the droid himself. Bane uses this as a distraction in order to steal the holocron without being noticed. Cato informs the Jedi that Bane's next target is Bola Rapol, with Windu revealing that Rapol is the keeper of a crystal which contains data only accessible by a holocron, the data on it being a list of future younglings, putting the very future of the Jedi Order itself at risk. Cad Bane has successfully taken Jedi Master Bola Rapol, keeper of the holocron memory crystal, from the Jedi Temple on Deveron. Anakin and Ahsoka have quickly been sent to the planet to prevent Bane from escaping its orbit. Two B-2 battle droids drag Rapol's unconscious body into a prison cell before shackling and torturing him in order to keep him conscious enough for Bane to get the information he needs. Anakin's plan to board Bane's ship confuses Larsen, who knows they don't have the craft needed to do this, with Anakin's idea being that they will utilize the ATTEs. Rapol is defiant in that he will not open the Jedi Holocron, which becomes fatal for the Jedi. though Bane is undeterred, as 2 more Jedi will soon arrive, which they soon do, getting R2 to open a hatch granting them access into the ship. Bane gets the droids to configure the entire ship's functions to his wrist communicator, allowing him to gain an upper hand in luring the pair into a trap, leaving the droids on their own to defend the bridge, which quickly gets taken. Ahsoka finds Rapal's body before they are lured into the ship's cannon room. Bane turns off the gravity, making the Jedi and the clones float. Ahsoka tasks R2 with turning the gravity back on, which he does just as Anakin nearly takes the holocron back. Bane quickly sets another trap into motion, luring Ahsoka out of the room. One of the droids then trips and accidentally blasts one of the cannon's ammo cells, causing an explosion, which cuts Anakin off from following after her. Ahsoka follows Bane, who reveals that he specifically wanted her to follow him. As she seems to have gained the upper hand against him, he shocks her, knocking her out. Anakin forces debris off of himself. He orders Rex and the other clones to locate transport so they can leave, while he continues to pursue Ahsoka and Bane as the ship suffers critical damage. Anakin approaches Bane's location. He quickly dispatches of the B-1 battle droids, who inform Bane of his presence. As Anakin confronts Bane, he is forced to make a choice between Ahsoka's life or the safety of the younglings on the holocron. Despite Ahsoka's pleas to not endanger the lives of others, Anakin chooses her and unlocks the information for Bane. After doing this, as Bane is distracted by the now opened holocron, Anakin uses the Force to acquire both his and Ahsoka's lightsabers in order to fight back, but Bane quickly opens the airlock, turning off the force field and quickly fleeing with his rocket boots, while Anakin is almost sucked out with Ahsoka and has to close the airlock. As Bane attempts to escape, he is cornered by clone trooper Denau. Anakin and Ahsoka race to reunite with Rex, who is waiting at a Trade Federation shuttle, but Anakin would rather prioritize Bane, causing Ahsoka to remind him to have patience. As the ship is almost ready to blow, they notice what looks to be clone trooper Denau fatally shooting Bane, who falls off of the hangar's catwalk just as they enter the shuttle and leave. Back on the Resolute, Anakin regards his mission as a success, with both Bane supposedly dead and the holocron seemingly destroyed in the ship's explosion. The clones notice blood in the shuttle's interior, which isn't from any of the clones, and alert Anakin to this, while at the same time, Ahsoka approaches who she assumes is the injured Denau, before quickly realizing he's not actually a clone, revealing it's Cat Bane. Bane assaults Ahsoka, while Anakin gives chase, though he is too late to stop Bane from fleeing the hangar and leaving the system. Sidious informs Bane that he needs him to deliver 4 test subjects to a facility on the planet Mustafar, while Yoda holds a session with Mace, Obi-Wan and Anakin in order to sense the location of the endangered younglings. They discover that Glee Anselm, Rhodia and Naboo are target locations, though they are too late to save the Nautilon child, who has already been taken. Obi-Wan decides to travel to Rhodia, while Anakin goes with Ahsoka to Naboo. Bane impersonates a Jedi in order to take a Rhodian youngling. Obi-Wan is too late to rescue the youngling, with Bane yet again escaping the Jedi's grasp. However, Anakin and Ahsoka have better luck on Naboo, being able to prevent the Gungan youngling from being taken while also finally capturing Bane. Mace, Obi-Wan and Anakin interrogate Bane, though he is hard to crack, with them having to resort to using the Force after Bane had wiped his navigation log. After torturing him with a combined mind trick, Bane agrees to take the Jedi to their holocron and the younglings. On Mustafar, Sidious is preparing to condition the younglings as part of a plan to create an army of darkside Force spies. Obi-Wan and Mace become suspicious of Bane when they do not sense the children, though he affirms that they're safe, but at least they got their holocron back. Though, They soon fall into Bane's trap, triggering auto turrets which distract the pair long enough for Bane to escape. Ahsoka, while working on Bane's ship, discovers a lot of volcanic ash. This leads to her and Anakin discovering via the ship's fuel log that Bane made a stop in the Mustafar system, and knowing that none of the younglings came from there, decide to investigate, while Mace and Obi-Wan are able to escape the space station just before it explodes. Sidious is alerted to Anakin and Ahsoka's presence at his secret facility, with him ordering its self-destruction in response, though the Jedi are able to save the two children before they become a casualty, and with the assistance of R2 are able to escape in time. Anakin reports back to the Jedi Council that the facility's destruction also destroyed any evidence as to who was responsible. While Bane was able to escape, there is no evidence that the list of younglings was copied, but Yoda still knows the future of the Jedi is uncertain and that they must move forward cautiously. The three production codes for this story arc are CW113 for Cargo of Doom, which was produced between Lair of Grievous and Rookies, CW123 for Holocron Heist, which was produced between Jedi Crash and Defenders of Peace, and CW203 for Children of the Force, which was produced between Mystery of a Thousand Moons and Hostage Crisis. Cargo of Doom was written by George Krstic, with further credits being given to Production Season 1 series writer Henry Gilroy and Production Season 1 supervising writer Scott Murphy. Holocron Heist was written by Paul Dini, who had previously written Cloak of Darkness and the still yet to be aired Voyage of Temptation, with the same additional credits to Henry Gilroy and Scott Murphy, though the latter's title got changed to staff writer. Children of the Force has two main writing credits, with Henry Gilroy and Wendy Meracle, with Production Season 2 supervising writer Drew Z. Greenberg and Production Season 2 staff writer Brian Larsen getting additional credits. Rob Coleman directed Cargo of Doom, Justin Ridge directed Holocron Heist, and Brian Kalin O'Connell directed Children of the Force. Catherine Winder produced Cargo of Doom. She also produced Holocron Heist, though Cary Silver would succeed her before the episode's completion. Cary Silver is credited as the main producer for Children of the Force, with Catherine Winder getting an executive producer credit, considering the production season would have already been in early development while she was still producer. Both Holocron Heist and Cargo of Doom would be released at the beginning of October 2009 as the double bill premiere of the Clone Wars' second season on Cartoon Network, while Children of the Force released a week later, concluding the story arc. Children of the Force is the first out of 4 episodes to share a production code with the season and episode numbers it was released under. This would happen again for another Production Season 2 episode, as well as the first 2 episodes of Production Season 3, but would have not happened again due to the later production seasons being planned as an in-release order production, leading to the production seasons outpacing the release ones more and more, to the point where the unproduced Season 8 that was cancelled in March 2013 would have consisted entirely of episodes from a 7th production season. Overconfidence is the most dangerous form of carelessness. This fortune cookie invokes Return of the Jedi, being reminiscent of the exchange between Luke and the Emperor. Being produced before CW118, The New Padawan, Cargo of Doom features the original, less orchestral Clone Wars theme tune, being the only episode released as part of Season 2 to do so. though, like the majority of these earlier produced episodes, the end credits theme was changed to the more commonly used orchestral theme. This episode being before CW116, Dooku Captured, would have been a story that Dave Filoni and Henry Gilroy pitched to George Lucas themselves, with it initially just being a single episode story compared to the latter two production episodes that would have been ideas pitched by Lucas himself, with Cargo of Doom being altered throughout production to act as a middle part of a trilogy. An unproduced sequence from the start of the episode, which had been prevised, features Anakin and Ahsoka view a transmission from Bowler Rapol, revealing that his base on Deveron has been attacked and a Kyber memory crystal containing a list of Jedi younglings has been stolen. This would have been dropped during the process of the episode being retooled as the sequel to Holocron Heist, with the information not aligning up with the final story, where Ahsoka and Anakin already know of the stolen Kyber memory crystal's contents, as Bane had now also stolen a holocron itself from the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, with the crystal now just acting as a key to open it. The sequence also heavily implies that Rapol didn't get taken as shown in the final episode and instead perished off screen, with Filoni noting that when they initially named the character with an alias of his assistant, they didn't know that Rapol would get such a dark death, with the death most likely being added once the episode was pushed into season 2, which would take the show into a more mature direction. This unproduced hologram sequence was replaced with an unnamed clone reporting that both the holocron memory crystal and Rapol had been taken, with the clone being killed on screen and then the transmission going dead at the source, just like it did in the original version. The final version features lighting similar to CW102, with it being brighter than later produced scenes, as well as the clone model having its hair unfortunately clipping through his helmet. The final scene also features what seems to be stitched together dialogue when Anakin states, "We have to find out what ship Master Rapol is on," with there being a clear alteration to the line, changing who Anakin is talking about, with the scene even cutting away from him in order to not have to animate his changed vocals. All mentions of Master Rapol on board the ship would have been additional dialogue added later to account for this change. There is also another case of added dialogue, with Ahsoka mentioning that Bane has both the holocron and the memory crystal. This episode was initially written without knowing what the contents of the memory crystal were, with it purely being written as the episode's MacGuffin. By the point in development where the episode was prevised but still standalone, they had figured out what the expositional information was, with the dialogue in the previs scene also suggesting that the initial intention was only to have the memory crystal itself without a holocron being a part of the story. The idea of it being a list of Jedi younglings could have come from Lucas himself, as well as inspiring him to want to create an entire prequel episode, adding the holocron into the narrative, while also having Bane steal the holocron from the Jedi Temple, with it retroactively making the memory crystal a key of sorts. Future holocrons in the franchise would be depicted without this memory crystal-like key being needed to open them, instead solely requiring a Jedi, which further alludes to the crystal only being a factor in the story due to it being a remnant of an earlier version of the episode that didn't have the holocron. The newsreel would have been completely recreated later in production, considering it both uses footage from the later produced prequel episode, as well as directly mentioning specific details from it, including Darth Sidious's involvement. This version of the newsreel added significant additions to the planet of Deveron, including a dedicated Jedi temple, which got its own concept design. It was also planned for the droids who dragged Rapol's unconscious body to have been Black Guard variants of the retail droids created for CW118, the new Padawan. However, due to how late in development these changes were made, they were unable to create these new assets and had to cobble together a quick sequence using existing assets, which they did with a reuse of CW101, Castle of Deceptions, Bomar Monastery, as well as the standard B2 Super Battle Droid asset. This wouldn't be the last time they had completely recreated an episode's newsreel to align up with additional episodes that were added to the story later in production. The origin of the Kyber memory crystal dates all the way back to early drafts of A New Hope, with the Kyber crystal in these early drafts being an artifact sought out by both Jedi and Sith alike. Though, the expanded universe would rescue this concept after it was written out, being featured in the 1978 novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. The title of Kyber was almost resurrected during the development of Attack of the Clones, initially being given to the weapon Jango Fett used to dispose of Sam Wessel, before this ultimately was changed to a saber dart. CW113, Cargo of Doom, is the first episode produced that featured Cad Bane, with the origin of how he came to be being quite complex. Cad Bane was originally going to be the Gendai bounty hunter Dirge, returning from the 2003 Clone Wars micro-series, but limitations with the animation technology during production season 1 meant that they would have had to make Dirge human, with Dave Filoni deciding against this due to it changing too much of that original character. When Henry Gilroy scripted CW113 itself, he wrote a bounty hunter antagonist for the episode called Nom Kabar, with Filoni creating different sketches that depicted different design ideas for him, including a droid similar to IG-88, as well as a humanoid bounty hunter completely obscured by a mask. When Filoni took the Nom Kabar idea to George Lucas, he gave Filoni an unused cowboy bounty hunter concept from the original trilogy to use instead, with Lucas also wanting the character to be a Duros and giving him the name Cad Bane. Filoni turned that concept into another sketch, which were then given to designer Killian Plunkett, who created full production design variants with different varying levels of accessories, with the design with the least head accessories ultimately being chosen. Cad Bane's final design was also taking into account his characteristic of being well experienced in fighting Jedi, with the purpose of his cheek pipes being to counteract a force choke, while his rocket boots were for him to be able to keep up with a Jedi's ability to force jump. Cad Bane is a Western movie archetype, being a hired gun, with his design being specifically based off of the spaghetti western gunslinger character called Angel Eyes from the movie The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, who was played by Lee Van Cleef. This being something George Lucas was very specific with, while also adding a Peter Law aspect to the character as well. Corey Burton drew from several sources when figuring out what sort of voice he would use for the character, taking inspiration from, quote, contemporary soft-spoken heavies with shades of Humphrey Bogart and Robert Mitchum, playing him like a European immigrant who has somehow found himself in the Old West and has adapted to his dialect, making Bane a very cinematic character. Cad Bane is an older bounty hunter who is at the peak of his career, but unlike Jango, he lacks a moral code and will do anything in the name of credits, even killing the very individual to pay him, depending on if it is beneficial. Cad Bane commanding a separatist fleet feels very out of place for his character, with this most likely being a leftover of when they had planned to use Dirge, who was a known separatist allied bounty hunter previously established in the 2003 micro-series. Dave Filoni has stated that Lucas didn't want to use bounty hunters for season 1, though, considering Cargo of Doom was only the 13th episode produced, this was clearly something that George Lucas changed his mind with quite early on, and as they added a prequel episode to this story later in production season 1, and a sequel conclusion episode in early production season 2, the episode was decided to be moved to be a part of the release season 2, with the production order highly suggesting that Lucas's interest in Cad Bane is what ultimately led to the increased focus on other bounty hunter characters during the show's second production season, and ultimately led to the release season 2 even being marketed as Rise of the Bounty Hunters, despite having several arcs not focusing on them. With the gap in production episodes, it's highly plausible that Cad Bane's fake death at the end of the episode was originally intended to be genuine back when the episode was initially pitched and scripted, which would have aligned up with other one-off separatist leader type roles being the type of villain that Lucas initially wanted for the show, as well as the likelihood that Bane's plot would have been foiled before he could get the memory crystal's information. Lucas later changed his mind about featuring bounty hunters in the show and wanted Cad Bane to live, with this taking place before CW203 Children of the Force was pitched, as they had created an alternate previous sequence to show Cad Bane fleeing from the Resolute, surviving the episode while also having him unlock the contents of the holocron on a view screen and contacting Gilroy, with it highly likely not being a part of the original plan due to how there are no dedicated designs created for the Jedi younglings, with some rough sketches being used to substitute them, which wouldn't have been the case had this been planned for the episode initially, as they'd have been included in the design phase that takes place before a story arc is usually proxy modelled and prevised. The final ending of the episode, minus Anakin's comment of still feeling Bane, as well as Bane's impersonation of Danao, is most likely what the original intended ending was, before being altered to show Bane surviving after Holocron Heist became an episode, before then being somewhat reverted after the reveal of Bane being alive was moved into CW203, showing how this episode would have been changed multiple times to align with its production successors. It also seems that Bane's survival being in Cargo of Doom itself would have been a decision made before they expanded Bola Rapol's role in the episode, as the final episode itself, without the additional scenes of Bane's survival, is still 22 minutes, which is the limit Cartoon Network would have given for the episode. Cad Bane's later survival is reminiscent of both what happened with Martuk's death being changed in CW115 Storm over Ryloth, and also what would later happen with Cad Bane himself, where the original intention for him was to die at the conclusion of the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc's fourth and final episode, production episode CW525, before this was later changed by a different production team, with him instead surviving his duel against Boba, but not without needing a cybernetic implant in his head. When Rapol's death sequence was shot, Filoni and the episode's director, Rob Coleman, wanted to convey it as stone cold as they could to exemplify how Cad Bane doesn't care, with the droids also having their voices pitched down to sound like morbid undertakers. The scene's intention was to show that Cad Bane has no issue killing a Jedi and could very well do the same thing to Ahsoka later in the episode. An error occurs where Rex refers to an AT-TE as an AT-AT, with the two featured in this scene being designated the numbers 300 and 773. Clone Trooper Danao makes his return in this episode, being featured previously in only one episode, CW106 Duel of the Droids, as one of the first unique clones to be created in the show after Captain Rex. Unfortunately for him, this would also be his last appearance, as Cad Bane's survival meant that he was the one who actually died. Though, the idea of reoccurring clones besides the captains and commanders would continue to be utilised, with Fives and Echo, who were created in the following production episode, CW114 Rookies. Danao's death ultimately established that even the name clones weren't safe from being killed off in the show, starting something that would be continued throughout the rest of its planned run. The AT-TEs being used in a different scenario than seen before is reminiscent of both the Teth battle, featured in CW101, Castle of Deception, and them being used to flank Grievous's cruiser in CW-102, Downfall of a Droid. An alternate sequence of the ATTs being lowered onto Bane's ship was prevised, where the Vulture droids attack them sooner. It was also missing the in-between scene of Bane talking to Gilroy over hologram about the costs of the destroyed fleet, alluding to it having been added later in development to explain why Gilroy is featured in this episode, with him presumably having been the original individual who wanted the information from the memory crystal, which is alluded to within multiple scenes after this, where he wants Bane to transmit him the information instead of him just being the one to provide the fleet. A unique Ahsoka character design was created specifically for this episode due to the battle sequence in space not exactly being fitting for her tube top, with her getting a simple maroon outfit to replace it, as well as a space helmet asset that Anakin would also get. Though due to how minimal the changes were for these character models, neither of them would get a new proxy model for the previous sequences, instead using their regular outfit proxy models as placeholders. A remnant of this is seen in the finished episode just after Cad Bane shocks Ahsoka, with a close-up shot of her legs being white like her regular outfit. CW-116, Dooku Captured, would reuse the space helmet asset for Obi-Wan, but also give him a fully modelled suit to go along with it. The additional scenes added later in development, including the ship's cells, where Rapol dies, and the airlock, are assets that first appeared in Dooku Captured and could have been retroactively added into this episode. The episode is also the first one production-wise to feature the rear exterior of the Trade Federation shuttle, after CW-105, Bombad Jedi, didn't have one, and before CW-116 would add its cockpit to the Clone Wars asset bank. The scene featuring Ahsoka finding Rapol's body seems slotted into the story, with it being added at a later date, with another thing supporting this being that Anakin specifically mentions returning the Holocron to the Jedi Library, which is a direct callback to the later produced Holocron Heist. Ahsoka also specifically mentions Gilroy getting his hands on the Holocron in this scene, which is odd as there seems to not be a previous establishing scene that informs the Jedi that he is the Separatist who wants it, with this perhaps being slightly altered dialogue taken out of a replaced scene, or perhaps suggesting that R2's report on the bridge revealed that Gilroy was the culprit, before being replaced to them discovering Bane has both the Holocron and the memory crystal. The scene of Rex bonking his head on the pipe is a clear nod to A New Hope, where the Stormtrooper does the same thing on one of the Death Star's doors. It was also referenced in Attack of the Clones, with Jango bonking his head on the Slave One. The clones interestingly used night vision in the cruiser instead of the torches on their helmets that they used in the Castle of Deception section of the Clone Wars movie, perhaps suggesting that could have been a retroactive change to the movie that wasn't applied to this episode. Cargo of Doom continued to depict a unique battle sequence not present in any of the 6 Lucas movies, that being an anti-gravity sequence, with it yet again showing how the Clone Wars was pushed by George Lucas to do things different from what he had already done. Cad Bane's voice is notably less synthesized in Cargo of Doom compared to his later appearances in the series. The episode was edited many times by Rob Coleman, Dave Filoni, supervising editor Jason Tucker, and George Lucas to make sure it was refined as much as possible, with a slightly earlier iteration of the confrontation in the cannon room, including a different shot of Bane and Anakin stating that he should surrender as the battle is lost. This line was replaced with Bane's line informing the droids to kill the Jedi. This was most likely also at a point in development where they already knew of CW-123 Holocron Heist, having already added a placeholder object into Bane's possession with a box shaped like the Holocron itself. Anakin states the infamous line, "It's a trap," as well as has super force speed like Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon did in The Phantom Menace. Ahsoka running after Bane feels like something that would have been a part of the initial script when Ahsoka was written as this impulsive character who ended up getting herself into trouble, which was a characteristic more common of her in the earlier produced episodes, which Holocron Heist would show at the start in order for her to learn from it yet again. This is something which contrasts with the later sequence of Ahsoka having learned some level of maturity, which alludes to the later sequence having been added by Filoni further into the episode's development, with him stating that by this point, her and Anakin have formed this team dynamic, which doesn't take into account that the production order places the episode as only the fourth story to feature the pair together, after the Rotter arc, the R2 arc, and the Malevolence arc, as well as it being before a bunch of story arcs where Ahsoka gained even more experience, including Ryloth, Mara Dun, and the Blue Shadow virus. Filoni thought that Ashley Eckstein's performance really sold these additional scenes, with it showing her character growth by her informing Anakin that he needs to have patience, as well as her not wanting him to risk the lives of the younglings just to save her. The scene also adds a direct example of why Jedi shouldn't develop these toxic attachments, as they end up endangering the lives of many for the life of one, a lesson which Ahsoka had learned in CW122, Jedi Crash, from Aayla Secura, while Anakin himself was injured, with her lesson in that episode also being something that could have been retroactively applied to Ahsoka's characterization in these additional scenes created later. Something which alludes to the possibility that Ahsoka's airlock scene was a later addition is how in the brief sequence where we see her on the floor when Anakin tries to contact her over the comm, it seems that Bane hasn't taken her into the airlock room, but has instead just left her unconscious on the corridor's floor. Anakin's dark side being focused on is also something that alludes to the episode having been altered for Season 2, with the second production season having more focus on his attachment issues in episodes like Mystery of a Thousand Moons and Senate Spy. Bane taking Ahsoka's Padawan braid seems to also have been a later addition, as it wouldn't have been something Ahsoka would have been originally able to retrieve without the existence of the sequel episode. Anakin's line of, "I don't have the holocron memory," seems to be a remnant of the original story from before they added the holocron itself to the episode, with the outcome most likely being that Anakin would have blown up the memory crystal on the ship alongside Bane before the episode was altered to be part of a bigger story. Had this episode had more time to be retooled to fit in with the later produced episodes, it would have most likely completely removed both Newt Gunray and the Separatist droid forces from it, as the story was changed to be a direct operation of Darth Sidious instead of yet another Separatist plot, with the original standalone episode most likely being written as the Separatists wanted the memory crystal's data instead of Sidious, in a similar vein to how they wanted to attack Kamino in CW114 to prevent the production of the Republic's clone army, with the original intention, like with Rookies, being that this plot would have been foiled by Anakin and Ahsoka before anything could actually happen, but also like that arc, it was retroactively expanded on to actually show what would happen. It also seems that when CW113 was initially pitched, it was at a time where Lucas didn't let them use Sidious in a more direct role, with him instead just being a figure that Dooku would report to. CW113, Cargo of Doom in its original form, and CW114 Rookies, before it was expanded on with production season 3, share a loose theme of the Separatists planning to attack the Republic's fighting forces at their source, but would ultimately be foiled at doing so by the end of the episode. Bola Rapol was included in the initial Chancellor office scenes present within the novelization of the Clone Wars movie, with this most likely being added in order to give the character some more presence within stories before his death. Considering he was created as a character who was purely meant to die in order to advance the plot, in a similar way to the later created Imagundi for CW224 supply lines, though his death was altered from its original off-screen implication. The tie-in webcomic, Act of Instinct, written by Pablo Hidalgo, would establish that Bola Rapol had an Iridonian Zabrak Padawan called Tizen Zebek, though unfortunately, due to the 2014 canon reset, this story, alongside all of the Clone Wars tie-in media that was created separately from the expanded universe, were moved into the Legends brand, removing Zebek from the current continuity until he is canonized by a new story. Admiral Yularen's characterization in this episode is also inconsistent compared to his other appearances, with him having a lot less patience for Anakin, with this being a character trait that should have been depicted in more episodes to give us a smoother curve, with him learning to work with Anakin's unorthodox tactics. With the amount of input George Lucas had on Cad Bane as a character, mixed with it most likely being him who came up with what exactly the Jedi Holocron contained, it is highly likely that his increased involvement in these details are a big factor into what ultimately led him to come on board and start fully pitching the episode stories himself, just 3 production episodes after this one. With it also being highly likely that Cad Bane went on to inspire the show to use more unique villains, as the previous produced episodes had used either Ventress, Grievous, Dooku, or a Trade Federation extremist like Newt Gunray, with the creation of Hondo being only 3 production episodes after Cad Bane, alongside the usage of extremist Nemoidians being phased out with Martuk and Lock Durd, while at the same time, the inclusion of Grievous, Ventress and Dooku in an episode's plot would be made less frequent, so when they did appear, their inclusion would be more of a focused highlight. A lesson learned is a lesson earned. Commander Wolf is depicted with a glass eye in this episode, which was caused by an event that occurred in an off-screen 3-issue tie-in comic titled In Service of the Republic, which was adapted from an unproduced script for the Ryloth arc. It is plausible that Wolf's eye injury was implemented within the show for this episode as a nod to this unproduced story. An error occurs when Wolf orders to fire on the leftmost frigate, but the right one is the one that takes damage. Wolf is also the only officer present on the bridge, being reminiscent of CW102, Downfall of a Droid, which predated the creation of the clone officer model, though this episode being the 23rd produced, most likely meant that this was a simple oversight due to how brief the scene is. We get a brief scene of Plo saving clone Warthog from getting shot down. This is in contrast to a scene from the beginning of Revenge of the Sith that had Obi-Wan not help him in order to focus on their mission to save the Chancellor, which alludes to Plo Koon perhaps being written to care more about his clones than other Jedi, as well as reminds me of Ahsoka bringing up her concern in Old Friends Not Forgotten about the Jedi being too busy playing politics. Perhaps this was also them seeding an idea into the show before Lucas came up with the inhibitor chips, where the clones would instead start to notice that the Jedi aren't focused on their lives, with the point of the clones being ordered by the Jedi being assumed by others like Argaius and Slick to be because the Jedi want slaves to fight their war. This episode marks the Clone Wars production debut of Felucia, as well as the clone turbo tank Juggernaut asset, which overall wasn't seen that much throughout the show, though it did later get a more focused use in the 3rd season of The Bad Batch. The Jedi Temple also got a bunch of new assets created for it, including the library, its librarian, Jocasta Nu, the corridors, the communications/war room that would later be added into a scene created specifically for the Clone Wars movie, the analysis droids first seen in Attack of the Clones, the security room first seen in Revenge of the Sith, as well as the overall on-screen debut of the Holocron Vault. The Clone Wars movie Blu-ray voice actors featurette has footage of the actors recording voiceover for CW123. This can be seen with the likes of Seth Green, Flo DeRee, and Gwendolyn Yao in attendance, voicing Todo 360, Jocasta Nu, and Kato Parasiti within the episode. The voice actors who voice characters for the first time are given printouts of the model sheets of their characters' designs to give them some insight into the character and help them figure out what type of voice they want to attribute to them. One of the LAATs on Felucia are adorned with markings of Plo Koon and his clones reading Plo's Bros in Aurebesh. The Felucia retreat sequence mirrors the Battle of Hoth, where the rebels have to retreat. This is the first time that we are specifically shown Darth Sidious working against the Jedi directly, instead of using the Separatists, with it establishing how he did things from the shadows during the war, besides the actual war itself. The opening battle sequence would have been created to ease the viewer into the story with something familiar they had seen in previous episodes, before the metaphorical rug is pulled out from under them to reveal this is actually a story that isn't focused on the war itself, but more so on the inner workings of the Jedi and Sith, with the latter using the underworld's resources to their advantage to conspire against the Jedi. An earlier version of the opening Felucia battle sequence had Anakin's dialogue after Obi-Wan pushes him out of the way simply thank Obi-Wan, instead of stating that was close, as well as having Ahsoka use the turbo tank's turret instead of using her lightsaber to deflect the oncoming fire with lightsaber moves similar to Obi-Wan's in Attack of the Clones. The turret in the final episode is instead manned by the tank's driver. Ki-Adi-Mundi was initially scripted to make his Clone Wars debut within the Jedi Council scenes for this episode, but due to asset limitations, his model was not yet ready for the episode. A new type of Force-activated lock is first shown in this episode, with it also appearing again in later ones. This technology could have also been used by Jedi survivors, by Force-sensitive members of the Church of the Force, or by the Hidden Path to have some level of security when hiding from the Empire. The establishing shot of the Coruscant underworld, besides being the first time the underworld appears in the show itself, and the second time in the production after Zero's Palace, has several establishments with their titles written in Aurebesh, including The Hole and Purple Wur, the latter being a misspelling of Purple Worm. Cad Bane's opening scene has its roots in established conventions seen in the early film noir era, utilising the Dutch angle technique to exemplify how evil and disorientating the world of scum and villainy can be, with Bane's hotel room being designed to lean into this, having a very dirty aesthetic, while also being planned to feature a chalk outline of a dead Gungan, though this wasn't included in the final episode. Filoni wanted it to take inspiration from a stereotypical detective scene where you have beams of light shining through the blind-covered windows and cars speeding past outside. Bane's toothpick was originally planned as him smoking a cigarette, playing even more into the film noir aspect of the sequence, but was presumably cut due to age rating concerns. This episode marks the start of the Clone Wars doing stories that more directly involved Darth Sidious, which would become a key focus within the show's later production seasons, while there was also plans to continue having more stories directly involving him, with the unproduced production season 6 Son of Dathomir arc, as well as the unproduced production season 7 story arc involving the Sith Shrine. We get the backstory of Bane's ship, the Xanadu Blood, in that it's a resource given to him by Sidious. Though we didn't get to see it in the episode, it explains why it's the same model as a Magna Guard starfighter. This episode also depicts the Sith having a pre-established connection to the Underworld, which is something that the unproduced Star Wars Underworld TV series would have explored further with Palpatine's backstory. Sidious has also somehow acquired the plans to the Jedi Temple, with this potentially relating to how Underworld also planned to depict Palpatine having turned it into the Imperial Palace. Rapal's Aurebesh data screen states that his homeworld is Rhodia, his abilities are quote, in question, and his threat level is minimal, with all other information on him being restricted. The keyboard Cato uses while in disguise within the Jedi Library has its letters placed upside down. The Aurebesh on Cad Bane's bomb chip states "Countdown to Death." There was multiple different species that were considered for Ord innocence during his early design phase. Other designs being a human character with a long beard, establishing he was to be quite old, a bug-like species design that shares elements with Cato Parasiti's design, and a species with an elongated head with a pair of horns. Despite these alternate B, C, and D design options, they ultimately chose the A design for him, being that of a Skrilling, perhaps due to the character needing to be somewhat physically strong to make him knocking out Jocasta more believable. The Skrilling species was designed after a background creature featured in Return of the Jedi within Jabba's palace. Innocence being more bulkier than the average character allowed them to increase the variety of silhouettes each character had. When Killian had designed the character, he expected the voice to be gruffer and animalistic to make it an interesting contrast to his design, with him being a new character who was created to die in his debut appearance. Ahsoka gains another sort of mentor figure in this episode with Jocasta. Though she doesn't do as much as Luminara had done in the previous season, she does help Ahsoka realise how important roles within the temple are compared to their roles on the battlefront. There is a small parallel between Ahsoka and Jocasta with Luke and Yoda, where both Ahsoka and Luke learn to use senses other than their eyes, when Jocasta turns out to have been impersonated by Cato, while Yoda had hidden his identity. While we do not see the ceiling of the Jedi Temple's library within the episode itself, a huge circular mural was created for it, depicting notable Jedi, including what looks like the back of Yaddle and Yoda, as well as a Keldor Jedi that could be Plo Koon. Yoda is also depicted a second time at the top right of the image, if this is not yet another unknown member of his species who had somehow also been in the Order at roughly the same time like Yaddle, Yoda and Grogu. Todo 360 was Filoni's way of trying to get Seth Green involved within the Clone Wars, with him being a fan of robot chicking. Todo's design is repurposed from an unused Duck Chiang design, while the origin of Todo's voice was Seth's take on if he had voiced C-3PO. Todo's design shares the shape of the Alina species who first appeared in The Phantom Menace, perhaps being inspired from the same Chiang design. Todo being a droid means he doesn't have an animated mouth, so they really focused on his movements with his hands, as well as utilising Seth's vocal performance to really make him stand out as a unique character. Cato Parasiti is another member of the Clawdite species, first depicted in Attack of the Clones with Zam Wessel, with her having some blaster scorch marks on her outfit to show she has been through some blaster battles in the past. While Killian Plunkett designed most of Kato's appearance, it was Filoni who added her helmet. Kato's suit is a holo projector that is able to simulate Jedi robes. It is represented by its brief holographic flicker, with it purely just being a visual disguise. Cad Bane will do whatever he has to in order to get his money, including selling out and betraying the people he works with, which happens with both Todo and Cato within this episode, and most likely would have also been depicted within the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc. The destruction of Todo was most likely written into the episode to explain his absence within the earlier produced Cargo of Doom, which had been created without the foreknowledge of his character's existence, though Todo would be recovered and repaired off-screen, most likely due to Filoni liking the character and having stated on the story arc's featurette that they always ended up killing the characters he liked in the same episode they were introduced, with Killian Plunkett coining the phrase, "show up and blow up." Thus Todo returned in Season 3's Evil Plans, before being scheduled to have a seemingly bigger role in the unproduced production Season 5 Bounty Hunter arc, meant for the full 22 episode 6th season, that was cut in half due to the March 2013 cancellation. The trivia for Evil Plans confirms that Anakin rebuilt Todo off-screen in order to find out more information about the heist, but Todo ended up escaping and reunited with Bane. It was important for the production team to make sure that while Cato took on Jocasta's physical form, that they depicted her not having skill with a lightsaber, with them putting a lot of emphasis on Cato's attacks being largely defensive. Despite Ahsoka being quite fast in her movements, her goal of not killing Cato put her at a disadvantage, with her ultimately catching Cato off guard by using a chair to trip her up. This fighting sequence was one of Filoni's favourites, with him enjoying that they got to use Jocasta's model within a fight, even though it's not really her. Jocasta didn't have a lightsaber design beforehand, so the Clone Wars design team created one, as well as giving her model some visual accessories. An animation test created by Ingo Schachner for ILM and Lucasfilm featured this duel, with a slightly different character model for Jocasta. Ayla Secura appears in the Jedi Communications Room alongside other pre-existing character models, with her character model having been created for the previous production episode, CW122, Jedi Crash. Holocrons were created by Tom Veitch and Cam Kennedy for the Dark Empire comic series in the early 1990s. They have since become a pillar in expanded universe content, with them being used regularly as pickups in games developed by LucasArts. The production team knew how important a Jedi Holocron was and wanted to give it a level of magic, with it being this important blue object that only a Jedi could interact with. This episode is one of the few post the first initial 10 produced that have fully animated deleted scenes. The first one being Todo initially failing to find a break in the temple's shield, the second being Jocasta being alerted to the temple breach and informing Ahsoka of this, while the last one was Cad Bane revealing the location of his distraction. Due to how late in development these scenes were cut, it is highly likely that there was a last-minute change for the runtime of the episode, meaning that they had to cut these small elements late into production to compensate, with Ahsoka now just automatically knowing that the temple is on high alert. The ending of the episode has some detail inconsistencies with newer lore, which was done in order to fit the episode into the plot of Cargo of Doom, with Mace calling Bola Rapal the keeper of the Kyber crystal, though this does not refer to the crystal inside a lightsaber, which would become the more commonly known lore for a Kyber crystal, but instead the memory crystal Bane steals in order to unlock the holocron, with the lore being changed later on to have a Kyber crystal be a part of a lightsaber, while holocrons became standalone, only needing a Jedi to open them. If the story arc was produced in chronological order, or a special edition version of it was produced, the story would have probably completely forgone the memory crystal aspect altogether and had it purely just be that Bane needed to kidnap a Jedi in order to open it. Obi-Wan also talks about tracking down Cad Bane on Coruscant, something which is never brought up again. The Holocron Vault was planned to make a return within the first story arc written for production season 7, the Sith Shrine arc, that involved Ahsoka being forced to return to the Jedi Temple in order to help them against an attack by Darth Sidious, with them also discovering that the Sith Shrine is directly below the temple itself. At some point in the story arc, Ahsoka would have had to seal the Holocron Vault door shut to prevent Sidious himself from breaking into it, with her not directly coming into contact with him, but instead being shocked by her lightsaber that acted as a conductor. It is highly likely that had this story arc ever entered production and reached the stage where its location assets would have been modelled, that they'd have significantly upgraded the Holocron Vault's asset compared to its production season 1 counterpart. With Sidious also trying to access the vault, it is possible that Jocasta Nu would have been killed by Sidious in his attempt to break in, with her not being featured in Revenge of the Sith, as well as her Vader comic death not yet having been created. The new expanded universe that was created in 2014 has established via the Kanan comic that Cad Bane was paid for the Jedi Temple plans he had acquired from Sidious in order for someone else to bomb the temple after Barriss had already done so. This most likely being before he had his toxic pupil-son relationship with Boba that caused a head injury that would have taken him out of action for a while, though whether this second bombing on the temple would ever be counted as having happened in Bane's on-screen continuity is up for debate, considering how these off-screen events are treated in the same way that George Lucas treated the old expanded universe when it came to producing Clone Wars, his live-action movies, and the unproduced Underworld show. The first step to correcting a mistake is patience. As mentioned before, this episode was a later addition to the story arc, with it being planned in an entirely separate production season with different head writers. The newsreel does not mention the Kyber memory crystal, instead just mentioning the holocron itself, despite the crystal having been established to be the item containing the list of Jedi younglings instead. The newsreel also includes a fully animated shot that was cut from the final version of Cargo of Doom, that being Anakin and Ahsoka getting ready to jump onto Bane's ship. This scene was present on the complete Season 2 release as an unproduced story reel. The opening scene retells the ending of Cargo of Doom from where they land in the Resolute's hangar, though there is a significant upgrade in the production with more assets in the hangar, more varied lighting, and the character models having updated rigs. Yularen references dialogue uttered by C-3PO in A New Hope when he states that they need to lock them all down when trying to prevent Cad Bane from escaping. After Bane successfully escapes, Anakin invokes a movement Darth Vader makes at the end of The Empire Strikes Back by placing his arms behind his back and walking away. It is most likely that Bane's survival had to be moved into CW203 due to CW113 already reaching its runtime limit after the extra sequences that were added to it. The altered version of the scene, initially prevised for the end of CW113, had some slight changes to it, with Anakin actually attempting to chase after Bane before he escapes, while omitting the entire section of Bane contacting summary while listing the contents of the memory crystal. I would not be surprised if the reason why Henry Gilroy is credited as a writer on Children of the Force is because they repurposed the ending that he added to Cargo of Doom after the creation of CW123 Holocron Heist, that was later removed and replaced with the altered version included in this episode, with Wendy Meracle writing the script for the episode as a whole before Greenberg and Larsen adapted and altered it throughout the production pipeline, with Filoni, Lucas, the episode's director and editor, Jason Tucker. Sidious mentions that Bane must find 4 younglings, but the episode only ends up depicting 3. Perhaps the intention was to show 4 when the script was written, but had to be cut down to 3 due to production limitations. Despite Bane's original outfit being left behind on the exploding cruiser when he impersonated Danao, he is seen with it again in this episode, alluding to him having multiple versions of the same outfit. The meditation chamber in the Jedi Temple is a new asset, repurposed from the main council room, with the chamber first appearing in this episode after CW123 had created a lot of other Jedi Temple assets. With the amount of locations in Children of the Force, designer Killian Plunkett thought that this story could take up the length and resources of 2 episodes, while Filoni stated how the episode is a good example of something they couldn't produce in Season 1 due to the amount of location hopping the episode has. The planet of Glee Anselm, homeworld of the Nautilon, was planned to be featured physically, where Cad Bane had kidnapped the Nautilon Force-sensitive infant. The location was designed as this planet where the Nautilon would have these huge settlements on these large turtle-like creatures known as the Gampasa that would only surface for breath every few centuries. This planet made it as far as the design stage of the episode's development before it had to be cut due to production limitations, as well as Filoni not wanting to depict too much of these infants' lives, as they'd have to be taken back to the Jedi Temple to be raised after their ordeal. Additional concept art for the cut planet was featured on the Season 1 Blu-ray, suggesting it was initially an idea for a production Season 1 location like Rhodia, which had a more Dagobah-like depiction in other concept art. The Gampasa could have been based on the lion turtles from Avatar, considering Filoni had worked on that previously, though they were also based on the Harnunar from Native American mythology. The final episode writes out Glee Anselm by having Yoda state that the child has already been taken. Rhodia returns in this episode, being almost an entire production season since it last appeared, with the location being remade due to the huge advancements they have made since producing CW105 Bombad Jedi. Additional areas were added to the location's asset bank as well, including a wide landing pad as well as a regular street where Rhodians live, making the location actually seem lived in compared to how it was depicted in CW105. Wee Dun's ball is also based on the signature Pixar ball, though its colours have been inverted, presumably to avoid any copyright clashes. Further lore has been retroactively added to Bola Apol, where he had contact with the Rhodian youngling's mother, having stated to her that her child was not yet ready to join the Jedi Order for quite some time, suggesting Rapal was also a Jedi Seeker. Cad Bane impersonating a Jedi in order to steal a youngling is a story idea that would later be used for how Ahsoka was found by Plo Koon, with another bounty hunter known as Latrans impersonating a Jedi in order to steal her. R4P17 makes his TV show debut in Children of the Force, having previously been depicted in the episodes that were combined to form the Clone Wars movie. The Rhodium Mother uses the same Weequay blaster asset used in previous production episodes by Dr. Wendy and Tau Merrick, while the room she's placed in strangely has a bunch of consoles in it, which alludes to it being a reused interior asset from CW105. Captain Lunker is a reused character name from Gilroy and Filoni's initial more Star Wars Rebels-esque Clone Wars pitch, where they had a Gungan called Lunker in a role similar to that of Garazem Aurelios. The holographic Cribmobile includes multiple underwater Naboo wildlife that were featured during the Always a Bigger Fish sequence of the Phantom Menace, with the Colo Clawfish and the Sando Aqua Monster. CW203 is one of the first episodes that CG supervisor Joel Aaron worked on, with him being a key element for the Clone Wars' visual improvements throughout its production. Joel worked with Filoni in order to create the water effect for the Gungan city of Jaguar, with them deciding to paint the effect, sourcing a bunch of old paintings, with the final effect looking like it's melting wax, being specifically inspired by NCYF. It is plausible that Jaguar is the same waterfall city that was initially planned to be featured in CW126 Blue Shadow Virus before it was cut due to production limitations, with the addition of Joel Aaron as CG supervisor perhaps being the key element that allowed them to fully realise it for the show's second production season. The reason why the Gungan city was designed to be above water is because at this point in the show's development, they were unable to depict an underwater civilization. Another inconsistency with CW113 is present when Windu states that Bane's fear of whoever he works for outweighs the fear of them, with this directly contradicting how Anakin and Ahsoka thought it was Newt Gunray who wanted the information from the holocron, further suggesting that this dialogue was reused from an unproduced scene present in the original standalone episode. Despite Ahsoka suggesting the idea for the combined mind trick, she interestingly does not participate in it, with us not seeing her use a mind trick at all until later in the show, suggesting she is not yet as skilled with it as the others are. Killian Plunkett described the mind sequence as the trio having their boy band moment. This scene also features another use of sound design representing the Force, with the three characters having a surround sound ghosting effect applied to their vocals, while also adding a sound layer of Cad Bane's mental thoughts fighting back against them. We get the show's first example of Palpatine directly manipulating Anakin within this episode, something which would become more prominent within later produced story arcs. It also starts to establish how Palpatine wants to keep an eye on the Jedi's operations in order to counteract them. Filoni has stated that Palpatine's dismissal of Ahsoka is because her as a Padawan would be more suspicious of his dark side nature compared to Anakin, who has already come to trust him, with Palpatine deliberately casting a long shadow in this scene, with the lighting on Ahsoka having her half in the light and half in the shadow, representing that while she's Anakin's Padawan, she has not been corrupted by Palpatine like he has. While Palpatine's office entrance opens like a simple door within the show, there is a split above it, which alludes to it being able to open much wider, as it was seen to do in Attack of the Clones. Anakin stating how he believes the culprit is much more powerful than even Dooku is yet another contradiction to how him and Ahsoka believed it was Gunray, with the scene also establishing how Anakin is already onto there being someone besides Dooku who is working against them. Despite Cody having previously closed the airlock, it is open in a following shot. The holocron lights up within the Jedi's presence, suggesting that it is something they do when around Force users. As Mace is escaping the space station, he has a sequence directly referencing Indiana Jones when he retrieves his lightsaber just before the door closes. This would become retroactive foreshadowing to how production season 5 would have a 2-episode story arc with Mace and Jar Jar that heavily takes inspiration from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. While Ahsoka states that there are no younglings on Mustafar, there was actually a Mustafarian Jedi concepted to appear in Revenge of the Sith, though Ahsoka in this instance is talking within their circumstances of not having sensed a youngling there. Palpatine could have had Bane steal a Mustafarian youngling in order to mask the facility also being on the planet. Anakin brings up an old tactic by the Jedi to track smugglers by checking their fuel logs, which ultimately works in their favour here and is something Palpatine didn't predict of his future apprentice. Joel Aaron was also tasked with creating the lava for Mustafar, with the planet itself being given the green light to appear in the show after the expanded universe designs of Ryloth were discarded in the previous production season due to being too similar to it. Joel would re-watch the Revenge of the Sith Mustafar duel, where he would take the colours from the footage and apply it to the Clone Wars effects he had created, describing the process as if he was painting his house using the same paint it already had, with the effects acting how the live-action effects would, but in the stylisation of the show. Filoni struggled with the fan side of himself when depicting Anakin being on Mustafar before Revenge of the Sith, though he ultimately went with it as that's the location Lucas wanted to use for this story, with Filoni going really deep into the lore about the planet being a mining world, whereas George Lucas didn't mind because he thought it was the best way to end the story arc. A similar thing would happen for the unproduced Crystal Crisis arc, where Obi-Wan and Grievous visit Utapau before their fight there in Revenge of the Sith. Project Harvester is first retroactively depicted within this episode, with it explaining exactly why Sidious wanted Jedi younglings, with him planning to create an army of dark-side spies. This is something that was one of the first things to be expanded on in a project that was created after George Lucas retired, with discussions about Inquisitors starting in late 2012, during the time when the Clone Wars was still planned to be concluded with 8 network television-length seasons, predating the March 2013 cancellation that forced them to discard 2.5 seasons of plans and rush Rebels into production as a replacement, which ended up fully establishing this concept, though it wouldn't involve the surgery Palpatine spoke of. Due to this idea of dark-side Force spies stemming from the Clone Wars, with an episode that George Lucas would have pitched as well as approved, it is possible that this is a topic that he would have explored within his unproduced Star Wars Underworld series, perhaps having a dark-side equivalent of the Church of the Force, with them not using lightsabers but instead being more Force-based, which could imply that this arc was created as a way to establish how they came to be, with it being likely that before CW203 was planned, but post the creation of CW123, that Cargo of Doom would have ended with Bane escaping with the list, leaving the outcome to either interpretation or to be told elsewhere. The Bad Batch would have a similar thing but with clones, where Hemlock had disposable clone spy assassins that were seemingly brainwashed, with this being a parallel in that the clones and the Jedi were victims of Palpatine, with both of them also being tools he used. CW203 would be the last time that the Twilight would make a regular appearance, with it being replaced with multiple different Jedi shuttles, including the T6, which made its debut within this same episode. The T6 was inspired by multiple ship designs created by Doug Chiang for The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, the first concept being what retroactively looks like a merge between the T6 and an acclimator, while the latter was actually used in the background of a single shot on Geonosis, being given the title of Commerce Guild Cruiser. Russell Chong used these designs as a template and adapted it into the T6 shuttle. His initial designs for the shuttle were a lot more bulkier than what was depicted in the final episode. This would be a design trait that would be utilised when the ship was redesigned for live action with the Ahsoka show. The design was then retroactively applied to the animated medium at some point during the production of Tales of the Jedi. While the production teams probably regard these different designs as the same ship, it can be established in universe that there are two types of the T6 shuttle: the slimmer one that appears in the original production of the Clone Wars, as well as the crowd of ships depicted in The Rise of Skywalker, where ILM had designed a more faithful yet aged depiction of it, as well as the thicker ones introduced in Ahsoka and included in Tales of the Jedi, with both types appearing across both on-screen visual mediums. The Twilight would make one final return in Season 5's The Lawless, where it would get destroyed during Obi-Wan's attempt to rescue Satine after Anakin had left it in disrepair. This episode would also mark the debut of Cad Bane's first starfighter, the Xanadu Blood, which is a modified version of the Magna Guard starfighter asset first seen in CW-104, Castle of Salvation. The Xanadu Blood would make two more appearances within the Clone Wars during production Season 3 before being replaced in the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc with the Justifier, which would finally be depicted in a finished project with the first season of The Bad Batch. Though like with the T6 shuttle, its design was noticeably made thicker as well as more simplified by shortening the central thruster and removing its tractor beam. Mustafar would return in Season 5's Eminence, expanding the lore of the planet to be the home of the criminal syndicate, the Black Sun, with them having an entire fortress complex. The planet, including the fortress, was planned to make a return appearance within the production Season 6 Dark Disciple arc during its second episode, CW614, The Mission, where it would be even further expanded by having a location called Zitten Town, located near the fortress, in a story involving bounty hunter Asajj Ventress teaming up with Quinlan Vos to rescue the Pike boss's family, who had been imprisoned by Black Sun leader Zitten Moj for leverage over the rival crime boss. Had this episode been produced, it would have most likely ended up as part of what would have been considered as Season 7, back when it was planned as a traditional 20-episode season to air on network television. Cato Parasiti had a major role within Holocron Heist, helping Cad Bane steal the Holocron. But by the episode's end, she was arrested. While she cameoed in several other episodes of the Clone Wars, being featured in the Mos Eisley Cantina alongside other bounty hunters during the Season 4 Maul arc, confirming she either escaped or got released later on, she did not have another starring role. However, it seems that had the show not been cancelled, this would have changed, with her voice actor, Gwendolyn Yo, being featured in the July 2012 voiceover sessions for the unfinished Bounty Hunter arc, that while was being produced as the final story arc of the 5th production season, with production codes CW522 to CW525, it would have been included in the second half of Season 6, thus being a production holdover arc that wouldn't have aired in the released version of Season 5, as was the case with the Clone Wars production continuing to outpace its release seasons that can easily be seen from the release Season 4 and onwards. Cato hasn't appeared in anything set post the Clone Wars, highly alluding to the possibility that she met her demise during this unfinished Clone Wars arc alongside other bounty hunters during Boba Fett's insurrection against Cad Bane, after their continued friction throughout their mentorship reaches boiling point, with it even being possible that her body is featured in the released reel clip for the Boba and Bane duel, though it is hard to make out due to the low quality of the clip provided to us by Lucasfilm. Knowing that Cargo of Doom was altered throughout production to align in more with Holocron Heist and Children of the Force makes me wonder what the original standalone episode would have felt like had Lucas not decided to make the story into a trilogy, as well as it becoming a noticeable retroactive filler episode with its events being able to be cut up and summarized in a newsreel without much being lost. Maybe the production team could have even thought about discarding the episode at some point before they decided to try retool it and add some additional slower character moments to somewhat salvage it. Perhaps the reason why the original episode only used a Kyber memory crystal is because Filoni and the production team were resistant against using expanded universe elements if they had to change them too much, so they could have originally decided against the Holocron for that reason, before Lucas later decided himself that they would incorporate the Holocron. Future depictions of holocrons have not needed a memory crystal in order to unlock them, further alluding to the memory crystal only being featured in the story as a holdover from the original version of Cargo of Doom, with the memory crystal becoming a redundant key of sorts due to Bane needing a Jedi to open the holocron in the final episode. Cargo of Doom's animation fidelity shows that it was produced way before the episodes it was released around, with its overall look being more flat and its animation being more rough and exaggerated in areas. Anakin's blank expression to Rex stating they have no landing craft is quite funny, with Rex probably getting the impression that was a mistake. With this episode being produced early on in the show's first production season, I wouldn't be surprised if the original intent behind that was to show that Rex is still getting used to Anakin's unorthodox plans, which is something later produced episodes would change, to the clones already being used to Anakin's way of operating before the show's events take place, as seen with Cat and Mouse. This also extends to Yularen's attitude towards Anakin in Cargo of Doom, with it being way more cranky compared to even Cat and Mouse, which is when they first met. It also doesn't take into account that Yularen would have known of Anakin already using the ATTEs in Downfall of a Droid to counter Grievous's fleet in space. A refined version of Cargo of Doom could feature those Secret Service Sith droids depicted within the unproduced Son of Dathomir arc. As the story became central to Sidious, it makes you think about Dooku's lack of involvement and how it could suggest that Palpatine's plan with these dark-side spies could be something he kept secret from even Dooku, alongside him also intending to replace Dooku with Anakin, something that Townsend outright tells Dooku to his face in the same unproduced arc, with Dooku keeping his true intentions with Ventress a secret from Sidious as well. While Dooku probably knew that Palpatine could attempt to replace him, his hubris blinded him to not believing that Anakin would be the one to best him, while Anakin himself knew that Dooku wasn't behind the plot to take the Jedi younglings. Cad Bane is like the DC Joker Star Wars equivalent, with him being this foil in the Jedi side, with no morals, known to the Jedi backstory, or real name, with him just causing all this chaos for them in the name of credits. With Cargo of Doom being Cad Bane's first production appearance, it reminds me of how we now have his backstory via Tales of the Underworld, which established how Cad Bane isn't his actual name, as well as his whole cowboy western-like persona being something he had picked up off of someone else, with Matt Michnovitz writing those scripts, as well as the unfinished Bounty Hunter arc that seemed to focus more on Cad Bane than the show had done previously. It is possible that both him and Filoni took inspiration from information George Lucas may have shared about his backstory during the story sessions for said unfinished arc, with Cad Bane having a son who he abandoned, adding an extra element into him mentoring Boba Fett, who he could see as a replacement for the son he left behind, wanting to shape him into what he believes would be the ideal son and bounty hunter, though we ultimately know that goes south and they end up rivals. I am glad that Cad Bane became a reoccurring character throughout the first 5 production seasons of the Clone Wars, as what was done with him in subsequent stories post Cargo of Doom added a lot to his character. Something I unfortunately can't say the same thing with him getting another life extension post the cancellation of the Clone Wars, with him only appearing in 2 projects set afterwards, with one having him reduced to a regular bounty hunter, at first being hired by the Kaminoans to locate and return Omega, before being used to find children for the Empire, with this just being a repeat of him stealing Force sensitives for Palpatine, as he does in Children of the Force. Cad Bane's appearance after the Bad Batch is even more annoying to me, in that it extends his life 30 plus years just to have him become this last-minute shoehorned villain of the Book of Boba Fett, with another supposed death for the character. He was probably only added to add some personal stakes to Boba, as it alludes to the rivalry between them that has not been depicted in any finished project, due to their unfinished Clone Wars arc never being produced. Further reminding us of the unfinished story, that while we have enough indicators to know that the core story is canon, they seem to refuse to want to finish for some reason, with its absence making the continuity more disjointed than it has to be, in the same vein as the Ahsoka show being developed off of character arc events that have not been depicted. The difference between these and say the original trilogy starting with the Empire already being established is that these are major character arc beats that are treated like we know them. Meanwhile, the original trilogy's backstory is explained enough throughout its 3 movies that you don't feel like you're missing this huge entire chunk of a character's personal backstory, as well as not working with pre-established characters that the audience would already have an idea of in their heads, having seen previous projects featuring them, which even more highlights the huge missing chunk in their character arcs. This Swiss cheese type of storytelling only weakens the story long term, with the indication being that they don't want to tell the stories that build up to the ones they do want to tell. It's like they want a payoff to a build-up that doesn't exist, and therefore our investment in the stories feels less earned. However, the silver lining is always the hope that these stories will eventually see the light of day beyond vague core elements in Filoni's headcanon. The amount of changes done to Cargo of Doom and the amount they weren't able to do in time is a clear indicator as to why they decided to produce episodes in more or less chronological order during production season 3, as it meant that they didn't have to perform metaphorical open heart surgery on an already existing story in order to fit it into a larger narrative. With the show really coming into its own when they made the decision to make 4-part story arcs the standard, as well as the plans for the cancelled and unproduced episodes painting a big picture that they really wanted to push the show, having connected elements between multiple story arcs that made producing the episodes in 100% chronological order a beneficial factor, with them being able to do a direct follow-up to character arcs, which was the planned case with the unproduced Kashyyyk arc that was to come very soon after the Bad Batch arc, featuring one of, if not the first adventure that depicted Echo as a full member of the Batch, as well as with the Saving Voss arc that not only directly continued Ventress's story from the production season 6 Dark Disciple arc, but also would have had Ahsoka in the story too, having her work with the Jedi after having to return to the temple in the story arc before that, involving the Sith Shrine. Holocron Heist, being a late production season 1 episode, shows how much they had improved in the visual fidelity department compared to Cargo of Doom, with Felucia's opening battle being a lot more detailed compared to past planets. Ahsoka being disappointed that she has to stay off the front lines doing guard duty is something a more mature version of her character would probably be more open to, considering it would give her some rest from needing to be so alert and active on the battlefront. Holocron Heist allowed a Star Wars story to utilise a Claudite's shape-shifting abilities, which is something Attack of the Clones didn't do, as Zam being a Claudite wasn't something that was utilised when she tried to assassinate Padme. If Zam wasn't killed off in the movie, perhaps she'd have returned in this episode instead of Cato, with Zam knowing both Jango and Cad Bane being an element they could have used to imply that Jango and Bane knew each other before the Unfinished Bounty Hunter arc planned to explore that. I assume that this ability of Cato's would have been reused within the Unfinished Bounty Hunter arc, perhaps with her ultimately dying while impersonating another character, such as Aurra Sing, which would explain why Carl Newman thought Aurra Sing died in the unproduced arc, before Solo A Star Wars Story stated a different cause of death for the character. Holocron Heist has Ahsoka learn another lesson, though it seems all the lessons she does learn are ones that Anakin either ignores when the situation calls for him to, or ones that he didn't learn himself due to how quick he had to be knighted to be a general in the war. With Cargo of Doom being written before Holocron Heist, there are still elements left in its final episode that show how Ahsoka hasn't yet learned this lesson, especially being noticeable when she initially runs after Cad Bane and gets herself overpowered by him. It is odd that Ahsoka has never met Jocasta before, considering she was a youngling at the Jedi Temple, which isn't too far-fetched to assume that she'd have met her in the past before being assigned to Anakin on some sort of assigned archive task while under Group tutelage. If we spent more time with Ahsoka in the library, we could have had a larger focus on the Jedi's use of information and how important the truth is, that they don't fall for propaganda, with knowledge being a useful weapon to a Jedi, more so than using a lightsaber, like Cato tried to. Children of the Force and Cargo of Doom may be the only direct example of a sequence within the show where we can make a direct comparison between the leap in production improvements between seasons, due to them remaking the final scene of the latter in the former. Cad Bane being like, yeah, just pay me, shows he has no time or care for the drama between the Sith and the Jedi, this being a unique situation where someone can talk in that tone to Sidious and not get killed for it, with Sidious having to put up with this attitude due to him currently being this figure who has to stay in the shadows and request the help of the criminal underworld, while there are lots of Jedi out in the galaxy who could foil his plot. Children of the Force also shows how Windu is good at sensing past events, representing how he is a by-the-book Jedi. Yoda can sense the present, with him being more perceptive to the living force around him, while Anakin is focused on the future, being a trait he had in both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, as well as something Ahsoka would later learn from him. Though, unlike the live-action depiction of Anakin's ability to see into the future, this time he is actually able to prevent it happening, with this potentially explaining why he still believed he could stop Padme's death after failing to stop his mother's. While nothing bad happens to the Gungan youngling in the episode, they could establish that she later became a Gungan Inquisitor, which would be a unique species to depict in that role, one we haven't seen before. While some fans assume the Jedi kidnap children, this episode shows the exact opposite, with them leaving the Gungan with her mother, not forcibly taking any child unless the parents give them their permission. Children of the Force, establishing that a group of Jedi concentrating a mind trick on a strong mind, leading to possible brain death, makes me wonder if that has been depicted anywhere within Star Wars since, with Mace's statement alluding to it having happened before. This could be something that anti-Jedi propaganda could use to weaponize people against them. It could also perhaps create a story where a character has gone insane due to having this done to them, where their memory has been altered so much by it that they have no ability to retain much memory, if anything. Cad Bane deciding to take the Jedi to the Holocron is a perfect example of how he is out for his own life, first and foremost, with him even later double proving that by using the Holocron as a distraction for him to escape yet again. The T6 shuttle somewhat resembles the Libre in its appearance, which would mirror both how the Jedi have this connection with nature, as well as hyperspace later being established to have been inspired by the Purrgil. Anakin stating a point about them reporting all internal Jedi matters to the Chancellor because they're generals reminds me of the unproduced story arcs and whether the Jedi reported those incidents to the Chancellor. While we know they did with Son of Dathomir, did they with the events of Crystal Crisis on Utapau or the Sith Shrine incident? We also have the case of the Jedi discovering that the Sith are responsible for the creation of the clone army, with that being something they didn't seem to inform him of. Palpatine sticking his nose into Jedi business would eventually lead to the Jedi getting suspicious of him enough for them to appoint Anakin as their representative from the Council to essentially spy on him and report back everything he does. Something which perhaps could have been further built on in the unproduced final political based arc with Padme. Ahsoka shows some main character syndrome with her statement of it always being them who ends up doing the job, which is more true than she knows due to how her, Anakin and Obi-Wan are the main Jedi trio of the show, where a lot of the plots end up defaulting to them, reminding me of how the Jedi Council always ended up sending Obi-Wan and Anakin on investigations, such as with the Sifo-Dyas mystery, as well as the death of a Jedi on Utapau. It would not surprise me if the pair were also sent to investigate the disappearance of a Republic Venator during the unproduced X-Files inspired arc that featured the Yuuzhan Vong. Palpatine regarding the process of making the younglings Dark Force spies as surgery makes me wonder what that would have entailed. It reminds me of the inhibitor chips in the clones, though those were put into the clones during their embryonic stage. This is an aspect that would be changed in future projects to the subjects just being physically tortured until they break, with Palpatine's plan here coming off as more mind-controlling compared to the individual Force users falling to the dark side. Perhaps Palpatine just got lazy once he had Vader on board and couldn't be bothered to invest in the mind-controlling aspect, so just put the task onto Vader instead. Palpatine's mention of a second facility makes me wonder where that could be, perhaps suggesting either the Lemerge building in the Works District of Coruscant, or the Republic Medical Facility that was depicted within Revenge of the Sith and later on within the Clone Wars itself. Though, it could even retroactively be established as the Spire on Stygian Prime, which seems to be specialised in dealing with Force-sensitive enemies. Palpatine having a facility on both Mustafar and Stygian coincidentally represents the two locations of Vader's castle, with Stygian seemingly a likely candidate for it, when it was depicted on an ice planet during the concept phase of The Empire Strikes Back and what became The Force Awakens, with it even being possible that the inclusion of Stygian Prime in the Son of Dathomir arc was intended to show what the castle was used for before Vader became a Sith Lord, predating the production of Rogue One, which ultimately changed it to be located on Mustafar. The droids in the Mustafar facility seem to already know that it's the Jedi that are coming for the younglings. While this could easily be an assumption on their part, it could also suggest that a deleted sequence of them seeing Anakin and Ahsoka land on the planet via a view screen was once present. The episode is really able to utilise the improved lighting techniques to its advantage in order to show how dark and mysterious the Mustafar facility is, applying a slit blind effect to the shadows in the room. Children of the Force doesn't mention the Kyber memory crystal once, with them purely just stating that the holocron contained the list of younglings, with this solidifying to me that the only reason why the memory crystal was in the story arc to begin with was because it was the original MacGuffin in Cargo of Doom when it was a standalone episode, with them not being able to completely replace it with just the holocron. Children of the Force completely forgoes its existence, with it being something that was probably regarded as too convoluted to have outside of it being a side product of an existing episode retooled into a bigger narrative. Due to how forward-thinking this story arc ended up being, it fits in with arcs that would be produced several years later. It would not surprise me if they thought about making it 4 episodes at one point, in the same way the Ryloth arc initially was. It is a shame we never got the story arc that would have returned to the Jedi Temple locale and expanded on it. Though the Sith Shrine has been canonised itself, the specific details of it are different between projects, with the Tarkin novel stating that only Sidious knew of it. Meanwhile, later projects have established that the Jedi from the High Republic era knew of the shrine too, which would establish that Yoda might have known of it himself and not told any of the prequel era Jedi of its existence, suggesting that he perhaps went looking for it in said unproduced arc, after his Force vision in Sacrifice revealed to him that the Sith are on Coruscant. This would align up with how Yoda also knew about ancient Sith weapons, as confirmed in the also unproduced Crystal Crisis on Utapau story arc, with it adding more to the lore that the Jedi were slowly discovering Palpatine's presence and were putting pieces of the puzzle together. Perhaps that unfinished arc would have expanded on the ideas present in this one, with the dark side spies potentially even being the quote nefarious entities that endangered Yoda, especially considering Underworld had been shelved by the time of the story sessions for this unproduced story, which could then also be combined with a theory I've had that perhaps Ahsoka would have been established as the founder of the Church of the Force within the same arc, which would have put her in the position to counter these dark side spies. Perhaps Sidious would have turned Barriss into one of them, and Ahsoka had to save her. This predated the creation of the Inquisitors, and her story ultimately being told in Tales of the Underworld, though this could be reworked to still happen, but that Barriss doesn't remember what she did as a dark side spy, and decides to return to prison, accepting what she did was wrong, and wanting to enact the rest of her sentence, leading to her still being imprisoned by the time of Order 66. This could also be how she subconsciously realises her actions were wrong, with her tenure in the Inquisitorius showing us that she was remorseful of her past actions. This could give Barriss an arc where she comes back as this masked brainwashed figure that Ahsoka tries to redeem, which would foreshadow Darth Vader. This Holocron arc also has a mirror aspect with how it starts out with a seemingly innocent droid Todo who becomes a bomb and ends with nanny droids becoming hostile. It relays back into Ahsoka's lesson of not trusting everything you see, and like Leia says, never underestimate a droid. The Empire did, and it led to their entire Death Star battle station being blown sky high. The Children of the Force episode itself is unique in that it feels like it has multiple episodes worth of story in it. Had the arc been produced in order, they'd have probably gone a different direction with how it turned out and what each episode contained. Overall, I'm glad this story arc became the 3-parter that it did, with the addition of it being Sidious specifically plotting against the Jedi, adding a lot to the overall seriousness and stakes of the story. Had Cargo of Doom been produced on its own, it would have been less effective, with them just stating that a bounty hunter has stolen this memory crystal with this list, and then it gets destroyed before anything actually happens. It would have had less to say compared to how the final produced arc raised the stakes and had it explicitly stated by Grandmaster Yoda himself that the future of the Order is in danger. The story is also something that Filoni had clearly kept in the back of his mind for some time, based on how it was the catalyst for one of the earliest things he developed after he was forced to prematurely conclude the Clone Wars, as well as it clearly inspiring him to later establish that Ahsoka as a youngling was also nearly taken by a bounty hunter impersonating a Jedi. It is a shame that Cargo of Doom sticks out more due to the improvements the overall story had via its 2 subsequently produced episodes, with it not having enough time to be changed to completely align with Sidious becoming the individual behind the plot, as well as the memory crystal aspect of the Holocron being something that sticks out with more recent depictions of them, which the more you think about, the more it is telling that the story didn't always have a Holocron itself, and that the memory crystal was a quickly forgotten byproduct of production changes. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos, and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment, as it will really help the channel continue to grow further. Until the next time, goodbye.